And Angelica, do you have any Christmas traditions around your house?
We have a lot of Christmas traditions I have to keep up with. Most of them I inherited or didn't inherit. I guess I got them when I married my husband.
Mm-hmm.
He's comes from a big Christmas family, huge, like visiting them is like going to the North Pole. It's insane. And there are 100,000 traditions. And I didn't grow up that way. Greeks don't really make a huge deal out of Christmas. They're more Easter people.
Oh, sure.
We do stuff. We hide the pickle. Do you do that?
I mean, not as often as when we first got married, but I mean, it happens, sure.
Yeah. No, I've actually seen it in a couple stores recently, the glass pickle that you hide in the Christmas tree, which I haven't seen a lot. But we've had one for 20 something years. My mother-in-law gave us, and you hide the ornament inside the tree, and then whoever finds it on Christmas morning gets like an extra treat or a present. We just get bragging rights in this house because Bill and I are lazy and we don't actually put aside an extra present. But yeah, so we do that.
So it's a
And we
green glass pickle that you put
yeah,
somewhere in the tree, hidden
yeah.
inside, and the kids have to rifle through.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about it recently and they didn't know what it was and they thought it was super weird, and I looked up like where it comes from, and I guess it's German, but no one really knows the origin, and there are a couple of really dark stories. One is that a Civil War soldier from Germany survived by eating a pickle in jail. Okay,
Hmm.
probably not true. The other legend claims that St. Nicholas brought two boys back to life who were murdered and stuffed into a pickle jar. Pickle barrel, like a big, big pickle jar.
Wow. Why are there's so many dark,
I
dark,
know.
dark Christmas things? Like
I
think
don't
about
know.
like Scrooge or like, the Christmas Carol, how dark that
Yeah.
is, and Krampus, where he comes to your house and he like kills you or something. I don't understand why are so many Christmas things tied to so many dark things?
Well, Santa's scary anyway. I mean, if you really think about it, he's coming into your house in the middle of the night, like
He's
messing
always
around with your stuff.
watching you to see if
He's
you're doing the right
always
thing.
watching you. He's breaking in, going through your stuff, kind of leaving a mess.
Sure. Eating your food.
Yeah. And we do like Christmas crackers on our heads, the crowns and the prizes and all that stuff.
We do that.
That's fun. Do you guys have any other traditions that you just have to do at Christmas?
Well, so in my side of the family, Christmas Eve was always the big day. So we
Yes.
would do like oyster stew was sort of the traditional, and it's like a
Oh, that's fun.
Scandinavian thing. And
Yeah,
so,
that's fun.
but the thing is with that is only my dad, myself, and my mom will eat it. My sisters won't eat it. They're both allergic to shellfish and they don't like it anyway. So it just sort of become less and less of a thing over the years.
Yeah.
So we do Christmas Eve, with a dinner, and then we go open presents, and we opened up pretty much all the presents Christmas Eve, and then Santa came the next morning, and that was it. But with my wife's family, it's kind of the opposite, which is kind of good because then we do it one side with my parents, and then we go hang out with her parents the next day. But there aren't a lot of like very specific things that we do. When I grew up within a house without stockings, so we did no Christmas stockings.
Mm.
So that's been a thing that
Mhm.
my wife has brought over, and that's been kind of fun. Just you start off with the little toys or
Well,
whatever it is. Yeah.
Santa does that.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Um,
But then
uh,
like it's also kind of weird too because in my family with present opening, it's very rule based. There's a lot of rules. So you start with the youngest kid or the youngest person in the room opens their present first. Everyone watches them. And then we go by in ascending order, youngest to oldest. But we all take turns. You watch what they open. We all sit there politely. And then the oldest person goes last. We go just these rounds until all the presents are open. My wife's family is very much more catch can. We're just sort of all opening at the same time, but being
yeah.
pointed and paying attention, being polite. But there's no like strict structure about how we do it, which is kind of more fun in a lot of ways. Because there's one thing everybody loves is to follow rules on Christmas, very strict
Oh,
rules.
it was chaos in our house when I was a kid. Absolute chaos because my mom had no control over my brother and I. And so we would just rip through everything and act like little demons. And when I have Christmas in Missoula with my in laws, I think there's 22 of us now with all the grandkids and everything. It's very orderly. There's an agenda every day, what we're eating for breakfast, suggested activities between breakfast and lunch, what we're having for lunch, which tree we're exchanging gifts at. And It's a lot. It's a lot. It's fun. It's really great for the kids, but it's a lot when you grew up with just free flowing, crazy Christmas.
Mhm.
My one big thing that I have to do every year that I love is raclette on Christmas Eve.
You do raclette?
Yeah,
I've
it's
always
so
wanted to
good.
have that.
Yeah, it's great. It's so awesome. You got to get a raclette grill. Best decision you'll ever make.
Now, for those at home, could you explain what raclette is?
Yeah, it's is it German? I think it is German, right? Or Swiss. I don't remember. But you it's a grill that you put on the table, and it has these little trays underneath where you warm up raclette cheese, Gruyere, or whatever you want. And you grill meats and vegetables on the top, and then you pour the melted cheese, just slides over the meat and the veggies or bread or whatever you want, apples. And it is a million times better than fondue, in my opinion. It's
Wow,
delicious.
that's a strong statement because fondue is fantastic.
Oh, it's so good. But fondue is kind of tough. Like you're like sitting there dripping cheese across the table, and it's more of like an intimate thing. If you do raclette and you put the grill in the middle of the table and everyone's cooking their stuff, it's awesome.
No, I'm totally intrigued by this. That's the thing. We're trying to come up with some Christmas traditions for our little family, my wife and my son and I, and just trying to find some things that we can do every year. So we've talked about on Christmas Day, I've talked about maybe doing tamales, making tamales as a
Oh yeah.
family. I like the idea of everybody kind of pitching in on a meal together, like this
Yep.
raclette idea where you're all kind of, rather than me being in the kitchen and then popping it out and
Yeah.
at 3:30, all right, it's time to eat, everybody, and then they take 20 minutes to eat it, and then that's it.
That's the
So
great thing about this. It's just chopping. You do some marinating and chopping. The bowls are all over the table, and it forces you to have a really long dinner,
mhm.
which is great because like Thanksgiving, for example, you spend 3 days cooking and then everyone's done eating in 20 minutes. And you're like, really? You guys are getting up? Like, what? Raclette is an hour at least of eating and then sitting around and wondering if you cross the line with the amount of cheese you just consumed.
You'll find out the next day.
Exactly. Christmas morning's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm. I just imagine everybody sitting around opening presents in their
Just
pajamas, just the
farting.
smell just
That's
starts.
just so awful.
Sleigh bells ring. Mm.
Welcome to Film Swap, the podcast where we challenge each other to watch the movies that we've let slip through the cracks or purposely shoved into the cracks for whatever reasons. I'm Angelica Thornton.
I'm Nick Voll, and this is a Christmas special. We are covering It's a Wonderful Life.
Well, who are you?
I told you, George, I'm your guardian angel.
What is it you want, Barry? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Welcome home, Mr. Bailey.
Sentimental hogwash. I wish I had $1 million. Mr. and Mrs. Martini, welcome home.
This is what I wished for.
You see, George, you really had a wonderful life.
Merry Christmas!
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, we're doing It's a Wonderful Life, which is probably, top 3 Christmas classic films in America. After George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart, wishes he'd never been born, an angel is sent to Earth to make George's wish come true. George starts to realize how many lives he has changed and impacted and how they would be different if he were never there. It's like top 5 Christmas movie for me, but I guess I don't know whether I love it or not, depending on the day and when I watch it. My feelings for this movie change all the time. I
Wow.
always like it. Sometimes I love it.
Depends how sappy you're feeling.
Yeah, exactly. How have you gone this long without seeing it, Nick?
I think part of it is because it's an old movie, and especially when I was younger, I was not keen on seeing black and white films. And then I don't know, after a while, when you don't see a movie like this, you just sort of accept you haven't seen it and you don't seek it out, So that there's no good reason, but it wasn't a thing. Like my parents weren't super into movies exactly. So although we watched a lot of movies as a kid, we were discovering them on our own for the most part, recording them off TV or whatever. We didn't have cable. We barely got reception. We only had like 2 channels in our house. So it just never popped up.
Yeah.
So I never saw it.
Okay, this is the oldest film we've talked about by a lot in this podcast. It was released in 1946, 76 years ago. So less than 30 years before I was born. I was thinking about this. So that seems like a lot when you're a kid,
Mm-hmm.
but 1946 is closer to my birthday than I am now from high school. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Isn't that kind of scary to think about?
It's so scary. What the hell? So originally the trailer played up the love story between Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed, and the movie was not really a box office hit. It didn't turn into this beloved classic until it lapsed into the public domain in 1974. That's actually the year I was born. And then there was this free for all, and it was on TV, and PBS started playing it. So it really became a tradition, I think, for a lot of people in the 70s. Did you watch the black and white version or the colored version?
I watched the black and white version. I was not aware there was a colorized version.
Yeah, apparently that was controversial. I didn't know either. I started watching it the other day in black and white, and then I watched it with Alex, my 10-year-old. We finished it in color. I don't know how that happened. I think we just started watching the end of it on another streaming service. Apparently, director Frank Capra and James Stewart testified before a congressional committee against it being colorized.
Was this part of the Ted Turner thing?
I don't know what happened, but they thought that colorizing the film bastardized it, and Stewart said it looked like a Walt Disney threw up on it. He told Congress, I tried to look at the colorized version, but I had to switch it off. It made me feel sick. But they were responding to an earlier version of the film being colorized, like when it first happened.
Okay.
And I guess those were kind of crappy additions, and it looks a lot better now in color. But I kind of like the black and white version.
Yeah, it was a beautiful movie in black and white. I mean, the version I saw was really crisp and clear, and yeah, it was a pretty movie to look at for sure. I wonder, I wonder if that is that Ted Turner. You remember that, right? When Ted Turner colorized a whole bunch of old timey.
Yeah, I think that was in the
movies?
90s, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they would have still been alive then. Stewart.
Yeah, it
and
was
Capra.
because Jimmy Stewart died in 97. I think Frank Capra died in the early 90s. It might have been then. That's when everything was like, there was a push against everything that was getting colorized. So you might be right. What did you think?
I liked it. It moved a lot better than a lot of movies of that era do. I feel like, it had sort of that rat-a-tat old-timey style that is fun to watch when it's well written, and it is well written, obviously. Jimmy Stewart's got such a distinct personality on screen. It is at times hard to not think of him as just Jimmy Stewart. Having seen him in other movies, it's he's just so distinct. But he was very good in it. Donna Reed is, the hottest woman in the 1940s. That's for sure.
He really was hot.
Very, very hot. I enjoyed it. I could see myself watching it again, making it a semi-regular Christmas movie for sure. I think it'll be fun to watch with my kid when he's a little bit older. I think the messages are very interesting and still timely. Especially in the current era we're in, and not to get too deep into politics here, but the big business choking out the life of people.
Right.
And, we see that now, with, I don't need to get into it, but you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, that was kind of interesting. And then the whole idea too of the community actually like stepping up for each other is really important, especially as we're talking about right now with all of the corporate stuff, and then other political things where the communities have been organizing to protect their rights and things like that. I mean, so those themes to me are timeless, which is probably why the movie still works.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of themes that we can all relate to. And it really is about the message. I think you said that, which is why it's timeless. How do you impact the lives around you? Good or bad, everything we do makes a difference in the world. Obviously, some things in the film don't age well, but can we even have that discussion about a film that was made in the 40s? I mean,
yeah, you got to take it for what it is.
Exactly. I think it is ageless. The more I see it, the more I like it. It's a little corny. It's dark too. It's heartwarming. And I always cry in that final scene. And I said earlier, I love it or I like it depending on when I watch it, because when I do love it and I do cry and I'm like, this is so good, the cynic in me bubbles up and I'm just like, what? Okay, what is wrong with you? Because in the end, Jimmy Stewart is still, George Bailey is still poor and his house is still drafty. And he's just going to push forward with his life. And he still gave up all his dreams. But I mean, he's happy. And I guess that's the point. He's happy because he's got people around him that he loves, that love him. And I guess I feel like it's so overly simplified, but it's just truth.
Mm-hmm. That you have to learn to love what you have in your life and not lament that which you don't.
Yeah. I mean, last week I had a conversation with one of my kids, and I gave them the book Tuesdays with Maury. And
Mm-hmm.
that book is so corny and it's so basic, but it's like this movie. It's like a very basic reminder of, I think, the things that a lot of people think about at the end of their lives. When they put things into perspective and they have regrets and they think about the things they did right and the things they did wrong, it's like, it's all about the people around you. And I was going to give it to one of my kids, not the 13-year-old, the 10-year-old, because the 13-year-old won't. He's just going to get super cheesy. But this movie is kind of like that. It's a really good reminder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've all had those moments where you wonder what could have been if you did something else. I don't know where I'm going with that, but yeah.
Yeah, we can get into that because that's a big part of the film. What I think they did really well in this film, and I'm not a film expert or analyst or anything like that, but I feel like if this had been made today, they might not have spent as much time setting up George Bailey's life and all the details that connect him to everyone in his community. Like, it takes a long time to get to that scene at the bridge when we finally get there. But we need that. We need to see how close he is to Mr. Martini, Ernie, the cab driver. And then we feel the sting when these people don't know him and they shut him out. And I don't think that the movie would have been as effective had they not worked up to that for so long.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I agree that the setup really is the key. And, we talked about Love Actually last week and how there was no time to set up any characters. And it is interesting that they actually took the time to set everything up. I think back to the scene at the dance where they're doing the Charleston or whatever, and the jealous guy opens up the swimming pool beneath them, and how that just turns into a fond memory.
Yeah.
Like the guy was trying to ruin their time, but it made it even better for them.
Yeah.
And like these little moments that set up, you can see that George is a happy person, a positive person.
Yeah, you're getting
so
all
then
the
it sells
highs
it
and
more when he
lows.
becomes bitter and cranky at the end of the movie.
Absolutely. George Bailey's struggle to get out of Bedford Falls and to travel and to see the world, I think I can relate to that. I mean, I ended up in a place where I never thought I would be, because of a job and because of a sacrifice I made for someone else. So I didn't want to come to Portland. I had a job I loved in Boston. I moved here because my husband got a job. And then, I settled here and I had a family and I had kids. And I always think to myself, where would I be if I had stayed there and made the decision to, that's it. Because we made a conscious decision before we got married. What are we going to do? And I said, okay, I'll go with you. It's your turn. You're going to get the next job and I'll move wherever that is. And then I think, okay, I wouldn't have my kids. There are all these small little decisions you make in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept thinking about that as I was watching it. Where would George be had he decided to travel and then become the architect he wanted to be? And I think we all do that.
He gave up on college altogether. It does tell you too how the world has changed, where a high school graduate could become in charge of a bank.
Yeah.
And also that the entire bank could go under if one guy has an envelope of cash he misplaces. Like, where are the regulations? Where are the rules?
Yeah, it's fascinating, with the rush on banks and, the fact that he couldn't serve and his brother did serve, and how it changed the course of their lives. I mean, it's a really great look into the 30s and 40s.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Um,
But no,
I
back to what you were saying. I'm sorry. This idea though that these decisions you look back on, that what if, like what if when my wife, but back when she was still my girlfriend, she was going to Portland State and she transferred to Oregon, and I had dropped out of college at that point, and it was like you either move here or we break up, and I moved, and it was the best decision I ever made. But like, I had to think about it, and I'm glad I made the right decision. But what would have happened if we had broken up and I don't know if I ever would have finished college. I don't know if I would have found a fulfilling career. I don't know. I mean, maybe I would have. I don't know, but you just never know, I guess. So you have to just accept what you've done and make the best of it, like George does.
Yeah, I agree. I think I made the right decision. Obviously, I wouldn't have my family and the life I have now,
You
but
wouldn't
I
have a
also
podcast.
I wouldn't have a podcast with Nick Voll. But I also, when I see this film, I also miss that community. I don't feel like I have that kind of small town community or support system that he has, and I have had in the past, like growing up. And so sometimes I do feel like I'm in, I think they called it the unborn sequence. Obviously, it's not as dramatic in the movie where he's, going through Pottersville and no one knows him and he's alone. And so this does make me romanticize what it would be like to live back in a small town with like a big community around me. Have you ever had that? I mean, you grew up close by, so I don't know if you still have those connections.
Well, I mean, I still know. So first off, I grew up until I was 10. I grew up in a really small town in South Dakota. Like my elementary school had 25 kids in it. My class was the biggest with 5 kids in it. We had 2
Wow.
teachers for 2-room schoolhouse, like as small as it gets. And I think, moving out here, it took me a while to make friends and all that stuff. So yeah, I still have a little bit of that. I mean, I guess you don't think about how many people I know just by being around for a long time. And through work, I meet a lot of people, and it's not like news because I work for a school system. So I just meet hundreds of people, and a lot
Yeah.
of them have stuck around. And I feel like if I had a hard time, I'd have help. So I guess, yeah, I do have community. I don't think of it in those terms, I guess, but you're right. I think though, one thing to think about especially in a George Bailey type situation in a little small town like that, yeah, you've got these people around who can support you, but you also have all these people around who are watching you and judging you, and it's not all,
It's true. And that's why I use the word romanticize, because I know it can you make you want to rip your hair out. I grew up in the first place that I lived when I was a kid. I was born in this Greek community, a neighborhood called the Acre in Lowell, Massachusetts. And it was a huge Greek community. Like during the Industrial Revolution, that's when all the Greeks came to the US and they all worked in these textile factories. So they settled there. So when my mom and my father came to Massachusetts in the early 70s, they lived there because we wanted to be close to my mom's cousins and aunts and uncles. But every single family around us, we lived in a triple decker, which is like 3 apartments on each side. The people above us, the people next to us, the people below us on both sides were all Greek. They all had grandmothers living in the house and grandfathers. And so my mom could say, oh, I have to go to work and I don't have a babysitter. And there would be 3 yayas taking care of me. And like, you just go next door and the grocery store is a Greek grocery store. And you like go across the street to the Greek school. You went to school and the Greek church, and everyone on the street is Greek. And then you go 3 blocks and it's an Irish neighborhood. And so everyone takes care of you. I mean, I have all of these people that I call cousins and aunts and uncles and yayas, and none of them are blood related. And my husband and kids don't get that. But I'm like, well, I grew up with them and they were like my grandparents. So I kind of miss that. Everyone knows your name. You go around, everyone's taking care of each other. And it was the kind of situation where if someone didn't have money to pay the rent, because we were all poor, this was not a wealthy community, someone would pay the rent for you. Or if you were at the grocery store and you didn't have enough money, you just call and someone would come pay the rest of the bill. It's not like that anymore. I mean, that community doesn't exist anymore. Everything changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I watch a movie like this, I'm like, oh yeah, it's nice to have the support like that to lean on when times are tough, especially when you're raising kids. I was out here when my kids were babies and toddlers and we didn't have families. So it had to be a pretty big emergency for me to call a friend and say, hey, can you help us out?
Yeah. I mean, we are lucky, my wife and I, that we do have her parents live in town and my parents are 4 hours away. So, and then my sisters live in town. So that is a luxury that I didn't really think about until I had kids. And, I have another friend and they are, he's a teacher and it doesn't matter what she does, but they are totally on their own with their daughter. They moved back to Dallas where her family lives just to get closer to grandma and grandpa. And then, of course, they realized how much they hated living in Dallas. So they recently moved back, which is great for me. But it does underscore to me how lucky I am to just have people around. I don't have to make that decision.
I've always said to people who are from the Portland area, do you know how lucky you are that you're from here? Because you are from such a great part of the country. I mean, I love it here. I love Portland. And you also have family. So you don't have to spend all of your vacation time flying somewhere to see, family members for a week. As you know, in news, that's tough. When you're starting out, you get 2 weeks off a year. So you spend 1 week visiting one side of the family, the other week visiting the other side, and that's it. That's your vacation for the whole year.
Yeah, right. If you can afford to go on vacation at all on a news salary, but that's another
Yeah,
topic.
exactly.
Well,
Okay.
I always thought, so I do have relatives still in South Dakota, and we would go back every year as a kid. So I didn't take an actual vacation, maybe once or twice as a kid. We took a real vacation, and even those sucked. It's like we drive up to Vancouver, British Columbia, hang out for a week. It's fine, but it's not Disneyland or Hawaii.
Yeah.
But we would go back to South Dakota every single year. So I do understand what that's like. And my parents either couldn't afford or were too cheap to fly. So we would drive to South Dakota. So it's 3 days in each direction, crammed in the back of a station wagon. My poor little sister stuck in the middle seat the whole way. And we didn't have air conditioning. It was just a miserable time. Anyway, I get what you're saying about that. But
yeah, that sounds like a lot of our trips as a kid, because we didn't have money to fly to Disney World or go to Hawaii or do any of that stuff. So it was like road trips through New England in a sweaty car. That's it.
Exactly.
That smelled like cigarette smoke.
Well, at least in New England, you've got things to drive too. Because I mean, that's
everything's pretty close. Yeah.
I mean, Seattle's 3 hours away. That's something to go do. But there's just not a lot within this part of the country. It's not as dense. So you don't have as. My wife and I have talked about taking a road trip. Wouldn't that be fun? August, my son has never taken one. That'd be kind of cool. But where are we going to go? That's not going to take 3 days to drive to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
San Francisco, maybe. That's day and a half.
Vegas would be fun for you guys.
Vegas. Yeah. Vegas is a good, hard 2-day drive. But I get to go to Vegas every year for work. So I'm not super keen to go there on my vacation time. Because I already go once a year for free anyway.
Oh, that's fun. So you mentioned earlier that we didn't want to get into the politics of this movie and, corporate America and greed, but I think it's an important part of the film because it's been talked about a lot with this film. So the FBI and the House Un-American Activities Committee, Senator McCarthy's paranoid crew, they investigated It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, for having communist leanings. And so, I mean, you can see why, right? They wrote that the protagonist, George Bailey's story, was rife with subversive tendencies like demonizing capitalist bankers and attempting to instigate class warfare. Oh, God forbid. God forbid Mr. Potter can't take everything from everyone in the town and make them miserable.
It's compassion. That's the weird thing. It's not communism. It's compassion that they're talking about. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear the word socialism going around all the time now, and it's the same concept. It's like people taking care of each other. How is that demonized as something bad? You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's what they did when they pulled their own money out and they decided to save the savings and loan. And he reminded every single person who was trying to rush the bank about, what was at stake. And that's not communism. That's like, we're a community and you helped this person buy a house and this person helped you buy a house. And I love that part of the film. I think everyone needs to be reminded about how those things work at their core. That's how it's supposed to work, right? We're trying to have a society here.
Well, and what's funny to me about that, not to get too deep into this here, but you look at the people who are critical of this sort of messaging is, your conservative types. And then, this was a savings and loan. And guess who bankrupted the savings and loan? Charles Keating and his Republican cadre. It's, like Mr. Potter couldn't get it done, but we will.
Yeah. Well, and apparently Capra was a Republican when he made this movie. He was just trying to make this movie about, American values after the war, small town, and just people who try to do the best thing they can by themselves and their neighbors. And that's exactly what it's about.
Well, I think it shows, one, the shifting nature of political parties, because the Republicans then are not the same as Republicans now, and the Democrats same way.
Yeah.
But also the idea that at some point Republicanism turned from being in favor of the working man into defending the corporate overlords. I mean, it's very clear how that shift has happened in our country over the last 50 years, after this movie came out, obviously. So it is sort of a funny little time capsule of American politics in that way.
Let's talk about what maybe didn't work. I think while the film does a good job of making the hero George imperfect, I don't like Potter's character, and I think he seems one-dimensional, like an evil cartoon character.
He's Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Yeah, and I guess they need that, of course, to represent capitalistic greed or whatever. He's the villain of the Great Depression, but I think he could have been a little bit more layered.
Mm-hmm.
He seemed real flat to me.
Maybe he always had a puppy on his lap he was very attentive to the whole time.
No, maybe we know, I mean, they insinuate so many times, but that Potter doesn't have anyone who loves him, and that's why he hates George Bailey and George Bailey's family so much, because they love each other so much and they're so well respected and cared for. Maybe we get a little glimpse into his life, but I don't know if they can open that can of worms.
But that's more of the Ebenezer Scrooge story, right? So he is Scrooge without redemption, whereas I don't know who Jimmy Stewart is. Maybe he's Bob Cratchit, but so I don't know if you need to tell that story.
Yeah, you're right. And it's impossible to go there without overdoing it, I guess. I don't know. Someone needs to get Uncle Billy some help.
Yeah. But this is a different era, that wasn't.
He was a hoarder. He's running around with strings tied to his fingers, squirrels in his house. He forgets to go to George and Mary's wedding. And then he misplaces $8,000. I think he has dementia.
Maybe they should remove him from a position of authority at the very least.
Yes, I was like, poor Uncle Billy. Why? Everyone's just kind of laughing it off. I'm like, no, he needs to be in assisted living with some tests done on for dementia.
That's funny.
And then there's Annie, the Bailey's domestic worker. And we only see her as that she's one of the only Black characters in the film. She, I guess, provides comedic relief. But what do you expect in 1946?
Well, okay, counterpoint to that though. It is 1946. She had lines. She was portrayed as a human being, even in a domestic situation. She wasn't just a, character who walks in, puts the plate down and walks out, or whatever it was. They very clearly liked her. I mean, he was chasing her around and having fun with her.
Well, and Harry Bailey kind of slapped her on the butt.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
so
she was a teenage white boy slapping. I was like, that's not okay. But it's 1946, and this was the best they could do.
Yeah, that's what I think. I don't think it was offensive. I think it was
playful.
The nature of that era.
Playful. I have to stop looking at it with 2022 eyes.
Yeah.
Maybe I should look at it with 2010 eyes, because they were different even 12 years ago.
Sure.
Really. George does save the immigrants, though. The Martinis.
Mm-hmm.
From Potter's slums. So that's actually a pretty good 1940s attempt at diversity, because people did not treat Italian immigrants very well in this country, and Catholics for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a big deal, I think. I think one of the lines, Potter asks him if he's going to waste his life playing nursemaid to a lot of garlic eaters, which is an insult,
okay. That's what that meant. I was like, what a weird insult. It didn't even occur to me that would be an Italian slur, but of course it is.
Yeah, because that's what was going on, especially after the war, right?
Well, I mean, they were the enemy, but Germans weren't treated that way. So, I mean, they didn't get it as bad as the Japanese, but.
Oh, the Italians, and I say this because the old Greek relatives used to tell me about how they were treated here during that time. It was not good. So, I mean, progressive for 1946.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Capra was a humanist for sure, so you can
Yes.
see how he has compassion for other people, and you have to be careful, I'm sure, at that time with your messaging. You can't be as overt as you might want to be. I mean, it's the same thing we see sometimes with the treatment of gay and lesbian characters in films of the time, or where they want to treat them like human beings, but you can't just say,
Yeah.
this is fine, this is okay.
Let's talk about Mary. She
Yes, go ahead.
saves, I love her. She saves everyone with their honeymoon money. Okay. She's the one who holds up that huge wad of cash and offers it up first. Okay. So she saves the savings and loan. And in the Bizarro world, the unborn sequence, Mary couldn't find another husband. She's an old maid, a librarian who wears glasses, by the way. I noticed they had her in glasses. So in the other world, she has to wear glasses, which is horrible.
I like that she's dressed up like an old woman. She's 29 years old.
She's got like big eyebrows, and she's a librarian in glasses, and she's an old maid. Like, what? Excuse me? First of all, in that world, George isn't born. Mary is still hot, and Mary can still land a dude. She's not going to be an old maid. Donna Reed's fantastic. So she ends up saving George in the end too, and I don't think she gets enough credit for it. Despite his bad behavior, when he starts unraveling, he's off getting drunk and threatening to kill himself, and she's out there hustling to save it all. She's like rounding up all his friends and telling everyone he's in trouble. And Clarence really doesn't save George. It's Mary.
I wonder if that's...
I would have liked to have seen more praise for Mary. She's the unsung hero of this.
I didn't think about that, but you're absolutely right. Clarence gets all the credit, but Mary does all the work.
Yeah, because in the end, he's seen his life, what it would be like had he not been born. But Clarence wasn't going to give him $8,000. Mary got the cash.
That's right.
And she set aside, I mean, his behavior when he started freaking out, like he told off the teacher and told off the teacher's husband. Then he starts yelling at the kids and throwing stuff around and leaves. And she just sort of gives him grace. And we don't see it, but we know she's running around town on Christmas Eve in the snow and asking people for help. So Mary saves the day.
So, I mean, then that prompts me to ask the question, do we need Clarence at all? Does the movie actually need the religious
I think you need it.
miracle?
You need Clarence because we're seeing George's life through Clarence's eyes. And that's the tool they use for us to see all of the important things that an angel second class would need to see to get to know George Bailey.
But why isn't the director's lens enough for that? I mean, can't they just show us? Do they need to frame it in some way?
Yeah, I mean, they could have done it, but I don't know that filmmakers and script writers were as sophisticated in 1946 and that the American audience was. I mean, think about that opening scene with the stars and God talking to the angels. I mean, it's so basic.
I mean, let's move beyond the fact it's blasphemous for man to pretend to be God. I'm not religious, but
right. And it's so basic. And I think they did that for a reason. They wanted us to follow along this pretty simple pattern to see George develop. So doing it through Mary might have been a little bit more complicated, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that, I guess, but I don't think you need them. I think you could have done it. And I don't think you would have needed to see George through Mary's eyes. You could have just seen George through these years and then
taken the religious element out of it altogether.
Yeah, but then again, maybe the religious element also helps them avoid accusations of communism because, Russian communism famously and Chinese, no religion, right? So
yeah, I didn't think of that. That's true.
You can say it's
the
not
edge off.
It's not communism. It's divine intervention.
That's right.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about here is it's funny to me that Jimmy Stewart starts as a teenager, a high schooler in this, and ends up as some indeterminate aged adult, probably in his late 20s or 30, maybe. He just looks exactly the same the entire time. It's like he's not believable as a high schooler, that's for sure.
I mean, he has a bloody lip, and it looks like they put a little makeup under his eyes to make him look tired. Alex kept saying that Is he really supposed to be a teenager, Mama, when they're like, it's before, I guess, George is supposed to go to college, and when he's like talking to Mary and all of those scenes when I guess he's supposed to be around college age, right?
Mm-hmm.
He looks 40,
Oh
and
yeah,
my kid couldn't believe it. And I said, you have to suspend reality. This is how they did movies back then. I mean, even in the 80s, high schoolers looked like they were 45 years old.
for sure. I saw a thing last night. It was hilarious. It was like a picture. You seen Father of the Bride 2? Steve Martin and Diane Keaton.
That's when she gets pregnant and the daughter gets pregnant.
Correct.
Yes.
Take a look at the pictures of them at those ages. They're 45 years old. I mean, Steve Martin obviously has the white hair anyway, but she looks like your grandmother. And it's like just expectations of what people look like at certain ages are definitely changing.
And how old is she supposed to be there? Do we know?
She's got to be, I mean, childbearing age, right? She can't be older than 50. I mean, even
Yeah.
you're
So
pushing it
she's
after
supposed
40.
to be like my age-ish, younger than me. I'm 48. And now it would be miraculous. So she's probably in her early to mid 40s, and they act like she's a grandma. Well, she is a grandma.
Yeah,
She
she's
becomes
literally,
a
and she looks
grandma.
like one. But she is, yeah.
It's
In the movie,
crazy.
she becomes a grandma.
So I read, it's hard to read reviews of It's a Wonderful Life, but I tried to find the original reviews, and they're ridiculous because movie critics back in the 40s were so weird. But there's a criticism that in some of the newer reviews that it's not really a wonderful life, and that shitty things happen to George in the end. And basically the message is it could be worse. So suck it up. Don't kill yourself. Keep living. I think that's crazy. And I think that's like, come on, can't we have nice things? Can't we have nice feelings?
Yeah, and what's crappy about that too is because the ultimate lesson for George is not that life could be worse. It's that there are people who love him that he didn't realize loved him. That if you're a decent human being, there are people that you don't even think about who have fondness for you or love you and will support you. That's the whole point of the damn movie. It's that,
Right.
you know, it's like, I don't believe in karma, but it's that concept. You do good things and good things happen to you. He has spent his whole life doing good things, and when he needs it, good things happen to him. And just because it's not a fairy tale doesn't mean his life is insignificant.
Yeah, and it's the value of those relationships trumping what could have been in George's mind, which is the job and the building things and the going to, I think they were supposed to go to the Bahamas or Bermuda for their honeymoon and stay in a really nice hotel and spend all this money. And it doesn't matter because you're friends with freaking Ernie, and he's awesome, and Ernie loves you. And, knowing the cab driver in town is great. And knowing that you saved the druggist from 20 years in prison, and you changed the entire course of his life.
And whoever the druggist would have killed with his bad medicine.
You saved a life. You literally saved a life is worth it.
And did you notice there was Bert and Ernie? There's a scene where they're both in the same room and somebody said, Bert and Ernie.
I thought of Sesame Street, and I wondered, I looked that up. I Googled it while I was watching it. And there are all these like urban legends that they named Bert and Ernie after the characters. But I guess people who worked at Sesame Street said it was just a coincidence.
Yeah, that would have been awesome.
Yeah, that would have been cool. Did you ever see the lost ending of It's a Wonderful Life on SNL? You probably wouldn't have remembered it because you hadn't seen the movie before.
I remember the sketch. I just don't remember how it goes. I know that I've seen it because it was Dana Carvey, Jimmy Stewart. Yeah,
he's the best Jimmy Stewart, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Uncle Billy runs in, and they're singing Hark the Herald, and announces that he remembered that he gave Mr. Potter all the money. So they all leave the Bailey's house where the party's happening, and they like storm Potter's house, and they bust the front door down, and George Bailey kicks the crap out of Potter. And Potter, who's played by John Lovitz, which is so funny, gets his ass kicked some more. And then Mary starts like pounding on him. And it's so violent, and the kids are cheering, and they all finish Potter off by singing Old Lang Syne, and it's great. It's so funny, but mostly because Dana Carvey does the best Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, it's one of his signature ones for sure. Yeah. What haven't we talked about this? So obviously you would recommend this movie to someone else. I would too.
Yeah, I would recommend it, and I think my son really liked it. And it might be the oldest film that he's ever watched, and I think he was moved by it. So I think it's a good film for older kids.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely nothing they can't see in it. I mean, it's another era, right? With what was it, the Hays Code? So most movies back then are
Yeah.
okay for kids.
I'm never going to turn the channel if it's on and I'm just messing around in the house and it's playing in the background. I'll leave it on. It's a good film to watch every holiday season.
I see. That's the thing, though. Like with modern stuff, we don't just have a TV on. We'll have the TV on, but I'll pick what we watch. You know what I mean? We just don't watch TV the same way. So I don't know if this whole idea where we're going to stumble across this and it's just going to be on in the background, that's not going to be a thing moving forward.
You're right. When I'm cooking in the kitchen, there's a TV on the wall, and I sometimes hit guide and I look for what's on live, but I only stop at maybe 3 shows: The Office, Seinfeld, or like Parks and Rec, if it's on Comedy Central and just like playing for hours. Otherwise, you go on demand and you find something to watch.
I mean, the fact that you still have cable is amazing.
I know.
Grandma.
I got to cut the cable. I am a boomer.
You look older than Donna Reed when she was a spinster.
How old is she in this movie? Do we know?
That's a great question. Let's look that up. Because he seemed really old and she seemed about right, I guess. So she was born in 1921. So she was 25 when this movie was made.
Yeah, she is. She's great. I thought her acting was great. I thought Jimmy Stewart's acting is great. I keep going back and forth. I don't know if I should call him James Stewart or Jimmy Stewart. He's Jimmy Stewart to me. He's Jimmy. I thought he was great. He was perfect.
He was 38 in this movie.
Yeah, and he was born to play this role. I know. I think he said before he died it was his favorite role. What's your assignment for me for next time?
Oh, I probably should have thought of this before we started recording. Let me look up the old.
Pull up the spreadsheet.
Old sheet here. What kind of movie are you in the mood for? I'm not like married to anything.
Let's look.
Are you in the mood for an action movie, a comedy, a drama?
Let's do either comedy or action.
Comedy or action. Tell you what, I've got a good one for us. So coming up is obviously after Christmas. We've got New Year's is the next one. Let me look. 200 Cigarettes. Have you ever heard of this movie?
No.
It is this weird comedy movie that just sort of disappeared into the ether after it came out. It stars Ben and Casey Affleck, Christina Ricci, Paul Rudd, Kate Hudson, Dave Chappelle is in it, Courtney Love is in it. It is set in 1980, I want to say. It's just on New Year's Eve. It's all these interweaving characters who are like all going to end up at a party at the end of the night, and it's about their little adventures leading up to this party. It's a really fun, dumb little movie. It's like the only movie in the world where Paul Rudd and Courtney Love are like, a couple or potentially a couple.
It could be a couple. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very
that sounds good.
movie. I will say it is hard to find. Streaming on it is a bit challenging. So I've got a copy if you need to watch it, but, it's a really fun. We've watched it a couple times now on New Year's Eve, because now with the kid, it's not like we can go out. So we do New Year's.
It's a movie night.
Yeah, we count it down at 8:00 and it's New Year's. They go to bed and we watch a movie. What else are we going to do? So we've watched this one a couple of times and it's a lot of fun.
Also, by the time you can go out, by the time August is old enough to stay home, or when you get a good batch of babysitters who are unwilling, I said unwilling accidentally, because no one's going to babysit on New Year's Eve.
Well, so we've got a 13-year-old neighborhood girl. What's she going to do? She can hang out.
She's going to get a social life soon, and she's not going to want to hang out with you guys on New Year's Eve and your kid.
Yeah.
By the time August is old enough, you're going to be too tired and you're just going to stay home anyway.
Wah, wah.
New Year's Eve is overrated.
I've had a lot of fun on New Year's over the years. We used to go to like the Sapphire in the Sapphire Hotel over there on Hawthorne, and they had this little intimate space. They always had a DJ, and we'd get like the bottomless champagne and dance, and like we used to be fun. Now I look like Steve Martin in Father of the Bride Part 2.
Now I'm drinking in the middle of the afternoon doing a podcast with you.
Film Swap is produced and hosted by Angelica Thornton and Nick Voll. You can watch or listen on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Follow Angelica on Twitter at Angelica KATU and follow Nick at Nick Voll. Share your thoughts on the films we discussed there, and we might just read them on the show. Music by John Michael Farley and Nick Voll.